The perfect offseason does not exist until now. Welcome in to this edition of Seahawks Today by Chat Sports. Tyler Jones here. Thanks for joining us. The 2023 season has concluded for your Seattle Seahawks. They are out of the playoff picture. Now we turn the page and look ahead to next year. What do the Seahawks need to do among some big changes for this franchise at one of the most important off seasons ever? We'll tell you coming up in just a matter of moments on today's show. With this year over, and now we look ahead to 2024. Want to ask you guys, with the Seahawks missing the postseason, not accomplishing the goals they set out to do, was it a failure? I think it was. What say you? It's our pinned comment today. Let us know what you think. Y for yes, N for no, if the Seahawks season was a failure or not. Let's start with the offseason outlook for Seattle. They finish up the 2023 campaign with a 9-8 record, and there's some obvious needs for this Seahawks team heading into the future, starting right at the quarterback position, defensive line, interior of the offensive line, edge, linebacker, just to name a few. The Seahawks will have 7 total draft picks in this April's draft, with the 16th overall selection as well in the first round. They do not have a second-round pick, but they do have 2 third-round picks, and there's some big-time free agents on this Seahawks team, including Bobby Wagner, Jordyn Brooks, Leonard Williams, just to name a few. Now, let's start with the head coach, Pete Carroll. I think, honestly, it's time to move on from the Seattle Seahawks head coach, and there is a respectful way of doing this. Obviously, we all love and respect the job that Pete Carroll did for this Seahawks organization over the last several years, bringing home a Super Bowl championship and a lot of great memories. But if we're going to be frank right now, folks, the reality is that every issue that you look at with this Seahawks team, whether it's offense, defense, personnel, the scheme involved, it all goes back to Pete Carroll. Everything goes back to Pete, and personally, I think it's time to clean house. Not saying you necessarily have to fire Pete, but whether he's forced to resign or take on another role in the organization, the Seahawks need a new leader. Plain and simple. They need to start fresh, new head coach, new OC, new DC, and start over with this organization. Because what we saw this year, losing 5 out of 6 games from November 5th to December 10th, that 9-8 record, 3rd in the division, 17th in points when you came in on paper with a dynamic offense. You spent a lot of money on that defense, and even just the little stuff, just not taking care of business when it came to being a disciplined football team. That all falls on coaching. First person to blame is Pete Carroll. Now, Pete expects to be back in Seattle. He said in a radio interview Monday morning with Seattle Sports Radio, "I plan to be coaching this team. I'm not worn out. I'm not tired. I need to do a better job." And if Pete is back, then there needs to be staff changes around him. I would say new OC, new DC, whatever it needs to be. But Pete Carroll, I would just go ahead and move on from him. You might even have teams that potentially would want to trade for Pete Carroll, and then you could get some draft capital out of it that way to help your cause on that front. I think it's time to move on. What do you guys think? Weigh in. Is it time to move on from Pete Carroll or not? HY for hell yes, HN for hell no. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. Today's show is sponsored by Factor. I got to tell you, I really love Factor meals. They are tasty, healthy, and you better believe I'm picking the filet mignon tonight, baby. Get started on your resolutions with Factor so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery. Takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door with over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, plus veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons. You'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. Forget frantic lunch preps and rush dinners. Factor's 2-minute meals are your secret weapon in the new year. Fuel up fast with restaurant-quality meals, all delivered right to your door. When things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order up every week with plans from 4 to 8 meals per week, or pause or reschedule your deliveries anytime. Head to factormeals.com/SeahawksChat50 and use code SeahawksChat50 to get 50% off. That's code SeahawksChat50 at factormeals.com/SeahawksChat50 to get 50% off. I love Factor Meals. You'll love Factor Meals too. Link is in the comments and description of today's video. Number 2 on our perfect offseason plan is drafting Michael Penix Jr. Now, we're recording this just prior to the College Football Playoff National Championship game, and I got to tell you, I really like what I've seen from Michael Penix Jr. I think with the Seahawks picking in around 16, they're going to be in the right range to be able to select Michael Penix Jr. Maybe you have to trade up a little bit, a few spots, but he should be at least in the neighborhood to pull this off. And it's not just a feel-good story. A guy in Seattle leading the Washington Huskies to the national title game, that would be great, I think, for all parties involved. Maybe there's a scenario where his head coach, Kalen DeBoer, comes with him in a package deal to Seattle. That would be something if he were to be the next head coach as well. But to me, I look at Michael Penix, and this is somebody that has done an incredible job with this Washington team. He's very accurate, a good decision maker. He can make all the throws. He's a terrific leader, puts this team on his back, and started his career at Indiana and really shined there, had some injuries. He faced adversity, comes to Washington, wins Comeback Player of the Year, was a Heisman finalist, won 21 games in a row. Michael Penix, he's got that dog in him, no pun intended, for the Washington Husky. And this year, his numbers have been very impressive. 35 touchdowns, 65% completion percentage, 4,600 yards. I know some people are going to say, maybe I don't want a left-handed quarterback. I got to tell you, I would want this guy. And there's still a position to bring Geno back and have Michael Penix sit behind Geno Smith until Penix is fully ready to go and ready to run an NFL offense where you're perfectly comfortable with that. There's too many good quarterbacks in this year's draft where if you're the Seattle Seahawks that you can't pass on a guy like Michael Penix or some of these quarterbacks that are going to be available. I would love to see Penix be the guy to stay with the Seattle Seahawks team long term. Should the Seahawks draft Michael Penix? What do you think? Let us know. D for draft, P for pass. Way in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Folks, we are your Seattle Seahawks offseason headquarters as we bring you daily Seahawks news and rumors. We're still doing our live shows on Wednesdays as well. Subscribe now for free. Help us get to 48,000 subscribers on the channel. I would love to get to 50 subs before the draft, but let's get to 48 first. Subscribe now. We'll have you posted on your favorite team all offseason long. Keep it locked in right here to Seahawks Today. Some notable free agents for the Seahawks this offseason that I would put priority in re-signing. The big three for me in particular that I would really focus on, that I think you have to bring back no matter what, are Bobby Wagner, Jordyn Brooks, and Leonard Williams. Starting with Bobby Wagner, leading the league in tackles this past season. He showed that he still has a lot left in the tank, that he's not slowing down by any means. Another Pro Bowl appearance last season, ended up signing for about $7 million. So I think you can find a way to bring Bobby back. Jordyn Brooks showed a lot of improvement. He and I think was a good match for Bobby, and we saw Jordyn Brooks really improve in the pass rush, something that he wasn't really known for in previous years. And then Leonard Williams, second half of the season, you trade for him at the trade deadline. It wasn't cheap to bring in Leonard Williams with the draft capital you gave up, a second and fifth round pick, but I think it's worth it. And I think that's an investment that you can't just let walk away, that you have to bring in, have to plan to keep Leonard Williams for a long time. Now, you're going to have to make some changes to be able to afford just to even keep these guys. The Seahawks cap space as of right now for 2024 is $1.25 million. I think there's going to be a lot of cut candidates. You'll see a lot of restructuring, some trades to free up this cap space. So you'll see this number rise, and you hear people say all the time the cap is just a myth anyway. But I think that you'll find a way to bring these guys back. Bobby coming off a season where he had 183 tackles, 3.5 sacks. He was very good this year. The folks at overthecap.com put his market value at about $14 million. Honestly, with Bobby making $7 million last year, I think you're realistically hoping he can take a hometown discount of sorts. Jordyn Brooks coming off a season, 4.5 sacks, 111 tackles. Remember, he had a torn ACL last year, and yet 8 months later still returned to the football field. His market value, I think this is a bargain of sorts. Over the Cap has him projected around $6 million, which I would gladly pay Jordyn Brooks $6 million if that is indeed the case. Meanwhile, Leonard Williams, in the games that he played this year, 62 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, and it didn't take him long at all to adapt from that New York Giants defense to the Seattle Seahawks defense. He's projected to be the most costly, $14.36 million that he's worth out there, but I'd be surprised if you spent all that just to let him walk away. I would expect Seattle to get a deal done. Who's a player that the Seahawks need to re-sign? I've named a few. There's some others out there. What comes to mind? Who's a player you'd like to see back in Seattle next year? Name them in the comments section and let us know what you think. Number 4, getting help on the interior of the offensive line is going to be very crucial for the Seattle Seahawks this offseason. And when you looked at this Seahawks team, there was a lot of expectations that this team was going to dominate with their run game, with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, that 1-2 young punch. But they struggled to run the football all year. And the biggest reason why was because they couldn't get a push in the interior of the offensive line. We're putting a help wanted sign up when it comes to getting some much-needed help on this interior of the offensive line right now, because you look at the numbers, folks, it was not pretty what this interior of the offensive line did this past year. Damian Lewis was your highest-rated offensive lineman at a 59.6. Evan Brown, 55.5. Olu Oluwatimi at 53.1. Phil Haynes, 52. Anthony Bradford with a 51.7, and he as a rookie, and he really struggled specifically in pass blocking. But there are plenty of options out there of interior offensive linemen that will be available for those services. Guys like Jason Kelsey, Kevin Zeitler, Connor Williams are out there in free agency, although, as mentioned earlier, the Seahawks don't have a ton of money to spend free agency. Draft prospects, Zach Zinter for Michigan is one possibility from the Wolverines. Cooper Beebe is another guy I like from Kansas State at the offensive guard spot. Zinter, he's not healthy right now. He won't be playing in the national championship game Monday night. But some notable names to potentially watch on that front of some draft options there. Speaking of getting help in the trenches, we don't just stop at the interior of the offensive line. We need help in the interior of the defensive line as well for this Seattle Seahawks team. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. Think about this. When I look at the interior of the Seattle Seahawks, this was such a disappointment because this Seahawks team invested a lot to try to fix this and figure this out, right? And you look at Jarran Reed, for example, somebody that started off the year really well, and then things caught up to him. Mario Edwards, those guys are not long-term solutions. You invested, but those were kind of Band-Aids of sorts to fix the problem. You still need some younger pieces. Look at the grades here. What would happen? What would have happened for this Seahawks team had they not added Leonard Williams? Look how much better he was than everybody else in the interior of the defensive line this year. 76.8 grade. Mario Edwards, according to PFF, had a 68. Jarran Reed, 63.5. Draymond Jones, PFF graded him as a 61.7. All that money Draymond Jones got, and that's the results that they were given. And then there's Cam Young, the rookie out of Mississippi State. His grades weren't great, 58.8. Now, granted, these are all guys that had a minimum of 200 snaps this past year, and the numbers just weren't great for that group. Now, there are some free agent options, some guys that are going to be worth a lot of money, so it's not an easy path to potentially get these guys. Like Chris Jones, Christian Wilkins, certainly would be some big impact players. Grover Stewart, too. But it's not going to be cheap to fork over the money to get those type of guys. But the draft has some good options here, too. I really like Devondre Sweat out of Texas, a behemoth of an individual, if I might add. Great at stopping the run, very good in pass rush as well, really takes out a lot of double teams. He's a guy in particular I like. I know PFF's not as high as on him. Mel Kiper does like Sweat a lot as well. But we'll talk more about these guys the coming weeks. Look out for Chris Jenkins, see what he does in that national championship game as well. What is the biggest need for the Seahawks entering this offseason? We've gone over a few of them. Obviously, there's plenty more. Weigh in the comment section. Tell me what you think that is. For more Seattle Seahawks coverage, Follow me on social media. I am on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Tyler Jones Live. You can find me there, and I'll see you next time right here on Seahawks Today.